episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies. Good morning, Sal.
It's a big day.
It is.
Right.
It is the day following the USDA report, Friday the 13th as well. So we have Aaron Bledsoe back with us this morning to cover the report and all of the changes and adjustments that's been made. So, Aaron, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. This is definitely not a dull report, I would say. The markets are right now on Friday morning. D's corn's only up a penny.
Friday the 13th.
Friday the 13th, yeah. Maybe that's weighing on the market. But D's corn's up only a penny at the moment. Nove beans are only up 5.5 cents. So after a report like yesterday, beans not so surprised by only up 5.5. I would have thought D's would have been trending a little higher than what it is right this second. But
you may want to roll back a little bit and just say what that report looked like there and get everybody.
Yeah, so that yesterday's report was the first one where they actually used the prospective planting acres and yield. But they kind of surprised everybody by dropping the yield that they projected back in March down 4 bushels to 177. So they were initially at 181, which would have been, that would have beat our record by 4 bushels. Well, they knocked it back down to 177, which is what we finished last year's harvest at. So still talking a record yield per acre, but we're looking at much smaller production overall because of the acre shift. To kind of dive into the numbers, we can run through those pretty quick like we usually do.
So basically, right before we got online here, you said that so they kind of rolled it back to what last year, which was a record year.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was a record year last year with the yield and everything. So, we had a really good production year overall. Had really good yields. Production number was really strong overall, which means our supply is really good. This year, because of the acre drop and that initial pullback in the yield to 177 versus 181, we're talking a much smaller supply than last year going into this thing. So we've got two things working here. We've got ending stocks, which is part of yesterday's report where they were looking at this 21-22 crop, which was a record crop. The ending stocks on it, estimates were 1.4, and they came right in there. They didn't do anything to the ending stocks. So ending stocks were, for this year, was higher than what they were last year at this point, but still smaller on average than what we're used to, I would say. So going into this 22-23 crop with 89.5 million acres planted, 81.7 projected to be harvested at a 177 yield, you're talking much smaller production versus last year. Last year, because of the acreage number and the yield that we ended up with, total production was 1.5 billion bushels. 15, yeah. This year, we're talking 14.5. So that's a pretty big drop. You just significantly took quite a few bushels offline just because of the acreage number.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because my first thing, whenever you said we're looking at another year like last year, and last year's a record year, well, the first thing you go to is like, well, we're going to be the same. Mm-hmm. But the acre shift is that significant.
The acre shift is that significant. You can do the math. If they would have left it at 181, obviously that production number would have been closer to what we did last year. But because they made that change, which kind of surprised a lot of people at this point, usually USDA is not one to make big swings early on in the process. They usually wait to see how it truly unfolds. To make that big of a change right at the get-go, it is all because of the delayed planning, which we feel like it's delayed, but we'll see what this week, come Monday when we finally see the planning report, what kind of progress we made this past week, because this past week's been phenomenal to get stuff done. But as far as looking at the 22-23 crop, the yield was the big thing. Dropping that yield is what drove the projected ending stocks for this time next year down to 1.3 versus a 1.4. So we're slowly eating away at this ending stock number. And this is one of those years where our usage is 14.565. Our production is only 14.46. So our use is actually greater than what we're going to potentially get out of this crop that we're planting right this second.
How many times has that happened?
Not very often. Not very often. And that's when you start talking about the stocks to use rate. We've mentioned it before. Anytime you get below 10% on corn, that means you're getting a little uncomfortable with what's going on. This projection is a 9.3% stocks to use rate. To put that in perspective, everyone remembers that 20 going into 21, which was last year, obviously. Big inverses, prices shot up. That was an 8.3 stocks to use rate. And I know that doesn't sound like much. I mean, you're 8.3 versus 9.3, 1%. But when you're talking about this large of a production and use, that's a big deal. I mean, that can shift prices real quickly. 21 and going into 22, this crop that we just finished up that we're still maybe have some bushels out there in the bins with, that was a 9.6. So we're a little tighter than what we were. Or they're projecting us to be a little tighter than what we are right this second for this time next year.
Kind of drives it home because if everything goes perfectly, we're going to end up at 9.3%. And that doesn't take into account any type of hiccups and possible weather events in the U.S. or any other planting delays that we have from here on forward.
That is exactly right. This is if everything goes perfectly.
Best case scenario.
Best case scenario, this is how it's going to go. And that's if exports stay where they're at, if usage stays where it's at for feed, seed, industrial type use, ethanol. If we drive the exact same amount as what they're saying this year, this is how we're going to finish. So this is their first prediction as to how this time next year we're going to look.
Not much cushion.
Not much cushion at all. No. It wouldn't take much of a weather scare to really cause issues here. So, but at the same time, you could also say, well, we have had a great window. Corn prices being where they are, that corn to bean ratio is much stronger for the corn acres to be planted. Could you see that 89.5 million acres go up? I don't know. I kind of doubt it, the way that we've been delayed. I mean, guys like to get their corn in, but there is that possibility. I mean, there are places and there are customers out there, not so much in Indiana, Illinois, Iowa, they usually don't make big shifts in acreage. But those fringe areas, those are the guys that may chase the market because they might have an opportunity to chase it. So you're talking about your Dakotas, your Kansas. Nebraska is a huge state for production. If they would switch some bean acres over to corn because they have an opportunity to, then you might see that corn acreage go up, which will put some more pressure on the corn market. But all of this is just talking about the U.S. So all of this is just saying we're pretty good. You know, if you just look at the production for this coming year and where we're at right this second, I would say that we're kind of comfortable where we're at. I mean, no news is kind of good news. But when you look at this thing as a global picture, that's when this market really gets kind of scary.
I've got a feeling you're getting ready to tell us about some of that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, where would you guys like to start? Would you guys like to start in Europe or would you like to start in South America?
Let's start in South America and work our way to Europe at the end.
Okay. Cool.
That sounds good.
All right. So, this report also looked at your global supplies as well. They didn't make any change to the Brazilian production for this corn crop that's in the ground right now. They're trying to get here in a little bit. They left that at 116 million metric tons. But that accounts for that safrinha crop. And we've talked about how big, and it's the majority. It is 77% of their total corn production for Brazil. That's what that safrinha crop means to them down there. That is a huge chunk of their production, and they didn't mess with any of it really as far as the total number is what they're going to get out of it, but they are a little dry.
For our listeners, I guess me too, safrinha, what does that mean? Is that a time or is it a place?
That is their, so
It's a second crop,
it's
right?
it's the second crop.
Double crop corn.
Yeah. I don't know what safrinha actually, the dictionary term for it might be second. I don't know, but when we talk about safrinha, that is their second crop corn. That is the corn that they plant after their beans.
Okay.
Yeah. It'd be like our beans after the wheat.
So they're getting 2 crops in a year. This is the safrinha means they're getting this is their second crop that's going in.
Yep.
And that is 77% of their total corn
Corn production. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's dry.
And it is drying out down there. Yep. So that is going to be something that we need to be watching for. If it stays favorable weather-wise, you'll see pressure on the market. It is smaller than what they were predicting anyway, so that gives the corn market some strength in it, in that crop's not really gaining much ground. I think the big fear is, does it start to lose ground? And if it starts to lose ground, that lends itself to prices continuing to go up. Now, as far as the 22 and 23 crop, they are projecting a really big crop, but we're literally a whole year out from that one, and we're actually, I would say we're a little further away than what we are for ours on their 22, 23.
You say anything you want right now.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I wonder how they're doing that. Just
Feels like a record.
Yeah.
Expansion of acres, or just the trend, or both, maybe, I guess.
I think it's a little bit of both. Yeah. I mean, high prices should try to pull more acres. That's the idea behind high prices. That's why we say high prices fix high prices. It tries to pull any kind of supply that it possibly can. Now, if you want to move over to Europe, where it is a completely crazy zone right now, to say the least. Ukraine corn production. This is where we finally got to see USDA to kind of take a swipe, at least a decent swipe at what their corn is going to look like. Their production, they're estimating, is down 54% versus last year.
Oh, my goodness.
That's 42% lower than the 5-year average. So last year they did somewhere around that 42.4 million metric tons. This year they're predicting something around that 19.5.
Wow.
Yeah. That's the big thing, because it's not so much that they were direct competitors for us. Their corn went to a certain part of the globe. Ours goes to a different set. But it's just kind of like what the fertilizer is going through, is that when you take one piece out of the supply chain, it has to be backfilled. So domestically, they're going to have I think domestically Ukraine's okay with their production. I think that handles their area, but all their customers have to start finding different supply. So when you start taking that many million metric tons off of the market, that's why the corn export number on the U.S. side is still strong. Is because they think at some point they're going to have to buy it from us.
Aaron said something, and I think it was the last podcast. Now, I just found it was just chilling to me. And he said, I think your words were, we've never had a war in a breadbasket type area. Yep. I mean, in modern times. Mm-hmm. And just to see some of the videos that's the news that's coming out of that area, and to see the tank tracks in the fields and the bomb craters in the fields.
And farming around landmines.
Oh, my gosh.
Yep. And you could see that picture on the NAS report. I mean, they had a picture of Ukraine, a field that was worked where they were working around where mines were.
And that's going to result in a 54% decrease in corn.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And then then the other big thing is,
there's more.
Can you get it out of there? I mean, that's the other question. I mean, can you get it out? I mean, right now they can't get it out of the ports. I mean, the Azov Sea is done. They can't move anything out there. They're trying to move it by rail to the west to get it to a different port. Well, they're having issues there, and it's not as quick. So this thing is, we've not seen a market like this for corn. We just haven't.
Well, the infrastructure in Ukraine has got to be just a mess. I mean, I just can't imagine. We get one bridge out, and our hair gets on fire over here, and I just can't imagine trying to move a lot of grain or any other products in the middle of a war, and all the other river and rail and road traffic disruptions.
Yep. So if you just look at the numbers, that 54% lower than last year, 42% lower than the 5-year average. If you think about it, I don't know how they're going to get it done to even meet that. I don't know. But if you just set that off to the side and say, okay, well, that's a guess, or that's what we think, that just puts more pressure on us to say, okay, the river has to act right so we don't slow barges down on a dam system that we already have issues with in the United States. I mean, that's not good.
Yeah, our river system's not great.
China's locked down, so the ports are backed up again. I mean, we literally need everything to work right
Sounds like that's going well for us right now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Yep. Yep. And they've already, we've talked about high prices cure high prices. They already dropped the export number for this 22-23 crop versus what we're doing versus the projection for this old crop that we have. They dropped it 100 million bushels. And a lot of that, I think, comes down to high prices will cure high prices. At some point, you start rationing demand. I think you're going to start hearing more of the food versus fuel. I mean, you saw Biden go out to Illinois, and I mean, I think it's some of the comments make you chuckle because it's like he goes out there and he's like, "Yeah, I want you to plant more." Like, well, as a farmer, why? You want me to plant more to drive prices down? Like, that just doesn't make much sense. But if you look at it, if you step back from the numbers, that argument is going to start being made of food versus fuel. And I think that's what's got me a little nervous is when you start hearing politicians start stepping into what should be a free marketplace, and that kind of makes me nervous.
Because you can't push on the system. I mean, you push on the system, it's like a balloon. You squeeze it one place, and then another spot bulges out.
Yep.
And if you take the ethanol component out, you're going to replace it with high-priced oil, which this administration has shown no desire to go pump out of the ground. So this is a conundrum.
It is a conundrum. There's no easy answers to this. I know we don't want to see prices take pressure, and they would take pressure if we ended up with that 181 and we ended up with a 92 million acre corn crop. I mean, that's going to put pressure on the market for sure. The hands down, doesn't matter what happens in Ukraine, it will put pressure on the market. But we really do need a good crop.
Well, we have to have. I mean, the input costs are.
Yeah.
We have 550 diesel and
Yep.
Ammonia prices that are 2 and 3x what they were. And so we're going to have the bushels to support it. And but unfortunately, you're probably right.
Talking to one of our coworkers here, and we've right before we come into work here, we're just chatting a little bit before we come in the building, and he just finished up some of his spraying, and he figured up what his fuel costs were per acre as he was spraying. And actually, he's got the monitor, so it tells him, as he covers the ground on his machine, and his cost is 60 cents per acre just in the fuel.
Wow.
To run over it and spray it, and that's spraying at one time. So selfishly, we need a good crop here and good prices. Globally, it sounds like there's going to be a real need for a good crop that can be exported and sent to places it's never gone before.
Yep.
Or at least hadn't gone traditionally.
Yeah. Yep. There's going to be a lot of hungry mouths to feed. And we need the bushels. We do. I think getting back to that cost per acre, Sal, that you brought up, and we need a good crop because of the high input prices. Well, I was kind of curious as to how much wiggle room we had in the corn because we've talked about how high it really is. So I took my closing fall bid last night. So at 2:15 Eastern time, we closed at $728 for fall delivery. With a cost per acre of $1,000, I said, let's go on the low side. Over there around Lagodi, 175. That's a pretty solid average yield. I mean, by solid, I mean safe average yield. We have very fortunate in that area to have some acres that can go well above that. But let's just figure a 175. So at 175, your break even is actually 137 bushels. So anything above 137, you're making money. So at a 175 average yield, you got 38 bushels that are just free to play with, cover your costs plus some. Well, if you set a target for like 740 on that, which I think could hit, you're going to end up with $279 profit per acre.
That'll work, right?
That'll work.
Okay.
That'll work. That'll work. There is definitely some breathing room there.
Good.
I mean, it feels good. It feels bad because you're talking about $1,000 per acre cost. I mean, even if it's higher than that, lower than that, we can change those numbers real quick. If you just call me, I can punch them in 2 seconds. We can have it done. But at $279 for a $740 fall delivered price, I don't know if you can afford putting it in your bin.
That brings it home. I mean, Aaron, so we started out here local, kind of got global, bring it back local, and the trick is to set your target and have a good crop and take care of it.
Yep.
You get this crop in the ground, take good care of it, and pray for rain in August, and we should be okay.
Yep. Yeah, and I was thinking about something. Corn, I've been thinking about it quite a bit, and this thought really crossed my mind this morning. I was thinking about some of our core values at Premier. Legacy is one of them. And I went back to Romans 5, I think it's 3-8, and it talks about rejoice in your sufferings because sufferings produce perseverance. Perseverance creates character. Those couple years ago when we were talking about the 18-19 crop, low prices, low input costs though, but low prices, it was tough to break even. We didn't have very profitable numbers, and if you did have profit, it wasn't much. You had to have your pencil sharpened, and you had to be very conscious of what you're doing. This type of year, the entry to play the game is very high, but the reward is very high as well. This is the type of year that can make your legacy. It really can, because you can bankroll some money this year to offset some of those other years where it might be tight. It doesn't feel like it. Emotions are high right now. We don't know what's going on in Ukraine. South America's crazy as always. I mean, shoot, all it would take is one trucker strike, and next thing you know, a record crop doesn't mean squat because you can't get it out.
Because it's stuck.
Exactly. So emotions are high all over the place. I don't know where this corn goes. I mean, you see all these articles out there. Well, if you look at the options and because of how much they cost and the standard deviation of 2 or 3, you can get to $9 or $11 corn. Like, I don't know.
740 looks pretty good.
Yeah, exactly my point. You don't know. I think the big thing is you just got to set time and a price on yourself and be disciplined. Set a plan and be disciplined about it, because these are the type of years where we could argue about, well, you're a nickel worse on basis than what you typically are on a 5-year average. Like, okay, but you can lose 40 cents in this market quicker than that 5 cents. I mean, a lot faster.
Save a truckload or two back to play with.
Exactly.
And but then lock in your profits.
Yep.
And go on.
Yep.
Pay the bills.
Exactly.
Bankroll some money.
Yep. And that was all corn. Beans. To go back on corn, I guess one last thing. USDA report, bullish because they dropped the 181 down to 177. Other than that, kind of ho-hum. I mean, no massive change from where we are right this second. Globally, it was a bullish report. That's kind of it in a nutshell, what yesterday the 12th looked like. Beans were very much just nothing much, really. I mean, I hate to say it like that, but we shrugged it off. So maybe slightly bullish. It kind of depends on how you want to look at this bean report. This one is very much up for interpretation on kind of which side of the, are you a half glass full or are you a half glass empty kind of guy for this bean market. The 21-22 crop, they were talking estimates of an ending stocks of 222 million bushels. They came in at 235. But from April, that's still down 25 million bushels for the ending stocks. So we still use some of it. That was because of exports. They adjusted the export number up. That's how the May compared on this 21-22 crop compared to the April report. The big thing on this one is the 22-23 crop. There's not very many beans left out there in the market. If there are, I tip my hat to you. You got some great prices. It looks great. But this 22-23 crop, that's the one that I really want to focus on. The report came in, the estimates were somewhere around that 319 ending stocks. We came in at 310. So slightly lower than what the estimates or the trade estimates thought, which is bullish for the beans. How we got there, they increased production 205 million bushels versus what we did this last year. A lot of that comes down to pure acreage. The yield is at 51.5. We had a 51.4 this last year. So it is all acreage for beans, all about that. And does that number work itself up? Does it work itself lower? Time will tell on that one. I'm not concerned about that yield really right this second. I mean, 20 going into 20. I always hate saying this one because it sounds like you're saying 3 different years, but the 2021 crop was 51. This last 21-22 was 51.4. Now they're projecting 51.5. I mean, we can raise good beans, so I'm not too concerned about yield yet on the bean acres. It's just the acreage number that we need to watch.
Which came from the corn, right?
Yes. Yep. Which came from the corn. You know, crushings, they upped 40 million bushels versus this old crop that we have. Exports were up 60 million bushels versus this crop we have right this second. So everything about the beans, they are saying we are going to use more than what we did last year on this old crop. And I think a lot of that is because of the production number going up, they're thinking that there could be pressure on the price because, you know, as your supply rises, you have to have demand meet it, because if not, your price goes down. Well, in our glut of harvest, that's when we really move a lot of beans out, or we look advantageous to at least lock a dollar amount in for those beans that we'll eventually send out, because at that point we're flooding the pipeline, prices are starting to drop. That's just the historical average of how the flow works. So in my mind, when I look at this just the 22-23 report for beans, I think they're saying we're going to have a lot of beans hit the pipeline. We have good demand, but we think prices could be pushed a little lower on this. So on beans, the only note I have on it for me overall is be a proactive seller. You know, the last couple times I've came on here and said I really like beans. I do. I love beans long term, but this crop is not one to play around with.
Stay engaged.
This is a very stay engaged. Corn, you could do nothing and you could walk into a grand slam. I mean, you could walk in and you could strike out looking. But the bean market is one that you have to be on your toes, because if not, it will beat you because you don't have the breathing room. You know, I kind of ran the same thing on the break even for the beans. At a 650 acre cost per acre, and my closing bid on the 12th of 1441 with an average yield of 50, you only have 5 bushels of profit to play with. So let's say you set a target for, well, I close at 1441. Let's at 1440. So let's take a penny off of it. Easy math. That's $70 per acre profit
On a modest yield.
On a very modest yield. Yes, our area around here, I would like to think that we produce better than that. But I drop these yields back on both of them because I always hear but it's getting a little dry. Like, okay, I'm also not asking you to sell 100% of your crop. Don't do that. That's bad. Don't. So if you get anything out of this, don't sell 100% of your crop yet. Don't do it. That's risky. But what I am saying is that even in a bad year, you produce 40% of a crop. And if you don't, there are tools out there to help you. You have your insurance. There's opportunity to buy those bushels back from your neighbor because you probably sold them at a good price. So there's ways to work through it. But this is not a crop to play around with in my mind.
Well, and our agronomist, Glenn Longaball, he's been on here several times, and one of his themes is we abandon beans way too early. And he has had a lot of success on some of his plot work, and which is basically his farm is one big plot, and doing some reclaimed coal mine ground. And he's convinced, and he has certainly convinced us that to stick with the bean crop, take care of it, spray some fungicides, insecticides late into the season, and don't abandon them too early.
Yep, I would completely agree with him. Do not abandon this. There is still opportunity for prices to go up, but this is one that I want to be very careful on because you don't have the playing room that you do with the corn. This is not something to gamble with. This is something to be disciplined, engaged in the market, talk to your merchandisers, be close to this thing. Have very close targets set, in my mind.
It'd be easy to get caught up in your production costs, but really do some figuring on that.
Really
don't
do.
be guessing at that because it does feel bad this year. I mean, obviously it feels a lot worse than it has in the past, but know that production number. I mean, that's got to be the key number in all of these operations. I don't know how you operate without it.
Yep.
We shoot for a target number that we want on bushels, but that's really not the number.
Yeah. Yeah. I've came on here before, said I like you to get to 40% sold if you can get comfortable mentally to that point. I want to clarify a little bit. I'm not saying 40% sold by the first time you put a seed in the ground just based on time. You have to look at price. This is, at some point, we'll get into a podcast where we go through 3 different farm marketing types, 3 different farmers. They all do it differently. We'll talk about the pros and cons to each one. But the reason I say 40% sold before your first bean or corn kernel is planted in the ground is it sets a time limit on yourself. But you need to look, like Ryan just said, you need to look at your break-even number. You need to know your number. If you don't have an opportunity before that first seed is put in the ground to price something that's profitable, then we need to have the conversation, okay, does this market feel like it's going to get even worse? Because then at that point, time is a factor, but also limiting your loss is the conversation. In this point, we're talking about trying to maximize your profit up to 40%, leaving the rest of the crop potential to continue getting better prices. So each of these segments that we talk about where I say, let's get to, at this point, I'm going to say, let's try to get to 50%. Especially on beans. I wouldn't be fearful of getting to like 60%, but we still have some really good window of time in the June, late May time for some really good prices for corn and beans. But at this point, I would be saying, let's get to 50% sold on both of them by the end of, May, maybe definitely before that June report comes out at the end of June. That's the big one where they'll readjust any acreage numbers and
that's
yield.
when they get to feel a lot better about everything.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. Because we have a pretty good feel for what's in the ground at that point. So I would be very careful around that one, because that one could be just like yesterday was. The end of June could be a really big firework storm, good or bad. So I think corn will be good. I think beans could be rough, which is why I'm sitting here saying be proactive on your beans. Don't give up on them, like Sal said, but be proactive.
That's all I've got. That was a lot. Aaron, as always, thank you so much for bringing in here, and I feel like I don't have to even look at the reports now, because I know the next day we're going to have you in here to decipher us and give us the cliff notes.
Yeah, I try to look at it a little bit so I know what questions to ask. But all headlines yesterday were the drop in that corn yield, and that's such a rarity that it's good to have a little feedback and a little input on that. And the global piece, I hope everyone's keeping up on the global piece, because there's a lot going on. Mm-hmm. So appreciate it. Thank you as always, and we'll have you back in probably in between the next report and this one to tell us what comes out of a bushel of beans and a bushel of corn, and get back to that conversation.
Yeah, where does it go? Where does it go, and what do we do with it?
Yeah, absolutely. So anyway, thanks, Aaron, again for this report, and that's another episode of The High Ground, powered by Premier Companies.